Psycho Killer, also known as The Grinning Man, by S.D. Perry. Steve carried the empty gas can, a blocky square of dusty red plastic. Every few steps his wallet chain hit it, making a thin clunking sound. Jay kept quiet until the woods started going deep, and then picked up the bitching he'd started back at the car. It wasn't dark yet, but the dirt trail was thick with shadows, the late sun blocked by the tall, silent trees.
I mean, it's our second fucking show,
Jay said. He flipped his long hair out of his eyes.
Six and Brian are already fucking there. We go on stage in 1 fucking hour, and you didn't think maybe it might be a good idea if you filled up before we got on the road?
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Steve snapped back.
I said I was fucking sorry. The gauge is broken. Sarah drove it all week. She said it had gas. Yes. Okay. I should have checked. I suck. I'm the worst piece of shit in the universe, okay?
Jay scowled.
You think Chris is going to give us another shot if we're not on stage by 10? On a Friday night? He's doing us a fucking favor.
I know that.
Steve said.
You fucking said that already. Like 5 times. The map said the station is less than 2 miles. We'll be back on the road before dark. We're like 20 minutes from the hat. We're fine.
Jay kicked a small rock off the pitted trail and into the empty, shadowy woods, still scowling.
No, we're not fine. Six is going to be bouncing off the walls by the time we get there. You know how he gets. And I'm sweating like a fucking pig. And Sarah can fuck all the way off.
Steve couldn't argue with any of it. The Dead Stirs' frontman, Dick Six, real name Just Montague, was wound pretty tight and was going to be extremely unhappy if they didn't get there soon. Jay was a hefty guy with a gut. His hair was sticking to the back of his neck, his shirt to his chest and back. Jay had been making noise about changing his shitty eating habits, but hadn't gotten around to actually doing anything about it. No surprise he was overheated on a late summer day, and Steve's little sister was ditzy and curling between jobs. She'd either forgotten to get gas, or had put in $5 and called it good. He should have hit the Shell by their house, but he'd been at work until 7, then had to run home, pack up his kit, and pick up Jay. The roadhouse that the Deadsters were playing, the Big Hat, was almost an hour away from his house in Harlan. He hadn't even had time to eat dinner.
You could have waited in the car.
Steve said.
I told you I'd get it.
Jay kicked another rock as the trail meandered around a big oak tree.
Where the fuck are we anyway?
West of Tillersville,
Steve said. The chain on his belt slapped the gas can again. Clunk.
Yeah, but where?
Jay asked.
Just the fucking woods?
Steve handed him the empty container and took out his phone. No bars. They'd only come about a mile, but apparently it was far enough to be in a cellular void.
No service,
Steve said.
Map said we were south of a small lake. Radnor?
Jay stopped walking. He'd put on black eyeliner for the show, and it was sweat smeared under his eyes.
Radnor Lake? Are you shitting me?
What?
Radnor Lake is where they found those bodies last summer.
Fuck you.
Steve said automatically.
What bodies?
Those guys.
Jay said.
Like 4 or 5 of them. Don't you remember?
He remembered, vaguely. All young men, all stabbed and hacked up and dumped in the woods. The Stadies had taken over the investigation and identified only one of the bodies from a missing persons report. The rest were too rotten.
That was over by Shelby,
he said.
No, dude. It was in the woods next to Radnor Lake. I fucking swear. All cut up, and they never caught the guy.
Steve's guts went cold. He didn't watch the news. He'd only heard about it from Aiden at work, who was into serial killers and shit like that. He remembered sitting in the stinky break room and trying to eat a sandwich, and Aiden telling him that the victims had all had their teeth smashed out so that no one could tell who they were. He remembered tuning Aiden out and thinking Ma had left the salt out of the egg salad. Without saying anything else, they started walking a little faster. The sky was still bright, but the sun was setting, the dark thickening in the open spaces between the trees.
10 minutes. We'll be there in 10 minutes.
Steve guessed.
We'll get the gas. We book the fuck back.
Jay nodded.
Yeah, that's probably.
Running footsteps interrupted him. Behind them somewhere, west, between them and the car, coming their way. Steve and Jay both looked back. Empty trail and trees, and the sound getting louder.
Oh, fuck this!
Jay said, and then they were both running. Steve's heart was hammering, terror spiking in his thoughts like hot glass, the packed dirt flying under his feet. Jay still had the gas can, knuckles white on the handle, belly and man boobs jiggling. He kept looking back, his black-rimmed eyes wide, his mouth a rictus of fear. Steve looked back too and saw a tall man in shorts and a zipped-up running jacket appear from behind the slender trees, his long face pale but for 2 red spots high on his cheeks. He looked absolutely terrified and was throwing looks over his shoulder. He saw Steve and Jay and called out in a warbling shriek.
Wait! Help!
Steve kept running.
Fuck that.
If someone or something was after the jogger, it was after them too.
We can all run out of these fucking woods.
Please!
The jogger cried, looking behind him again. He sounded scared as shit, and when he turned toward them again, he tripped on something and went sprawling, hitting the dirt hard.
Help!
He called again, a hoarse wheeze. Steve looked at Jay, saw his own hesitation writ large on his bandmate's dripping face. Neither of them were brawlers, but they weren't pussies either. And there were 2 of them, and the guy was still on the ground. He'd clearly knocked the wind out of himself. They stopped running, and Steve held up one hand, trying to listen for anyone coming over the jogger's gasps. There was nothing but birds and insects and the occasional small rustle in the undergrowth. The jogger crawled to his feet and stumbled toward them, still whooping in air. Blood trickled from his dirt-grimed knees. Steve looked around for a stick to pick up and saw a healthy-looking branch laying on the ground. He scooped it up like a baseball bat, but it was more like a big fan, the twigs and needles still attached, raining dirt over both him and Jay.
Oh my God, thank you.
The jogger said. He approached with his shaking hands up in front of his chest, still casting looks over his shoulder. He was limping.
There was this guy on the trail. He just stepped out from behind a tree right in front of me. I ducked around him and he started chasing me.
Where? Who was it?
Jay had dropped the plastic container at his feet and pulled out his pocket knife, a whole 2 inches of dull metal.
I don't know who it was.
The jogger said.
Half mile maybe. I don't know. I think he had a knife. He was holding something. I couldn't tell, but I think it was a knife. Can I walk out with you guys? Please?
Safety in numbers. Steve looked at Jay, who nodded.
Yeah, let's get out of here.
Steve said. He picked up the gas can, and they all started walking, quickly. The jogger was still limping, but kept up pretty good. Up close, he was older than Steve had thought. Maybe late 30s, early 40s. His nylon jacket was dripping with sweat, his dark hair matted with it.
Thank you. Seriously.
The jogger said.
Gina, my wife, she doesn't like me to run through here since last summer, but I've never had any problems. Ever.
Those dead guys.
Jay breathed.
You think it was the killer?
I don't know, but why would someone jump out from behind a tree like that right in front of me?
Steve turned to walk backwards for a few steps, staring down the empty trail. The shadows beneath the trees were getting darker.
No fucking way we're coming back through here.
No fucking way we're coming back through here.
Jay said, and Steve nodded, glad they were of a mind. Brian could come get them. It would be a trick fitting the kit into the guitarist's back seat. He drove a fucking Honda Civic, but it beat the shit out of getting hacked up by a psycho killer in the dark woods. They hurried through the gloom, putting distance between them and whoever had scared the jogger.
You boys run out of gas?
The jogger asked.
Yeah.
Steve said. He slung the branch up on his shoulder so he could pull out his phone, holding the bulky plastic block under his arm. Almost 9 o'clock, but still no service.
We're on our way to Harlan for a gig.
Oh, are you in a band?
The Deadsters.
Jay said.
We got a show at the Big Hat opening up for Youth Court and Hamster Fire.
Jay was trying to sound chill, but his voice was tight, and he couldn't stop turning to look behind them. The jogger nodded.
Cool. Look, I really appreciate this. I live a couple of blocks past the gas station. Just behind Annie's Cafe. I can give you a lift back to your car if you want. My name's Paul, by the way. Paul Marshall.
Shouldn't you, don't you have to call the cops?
Steve asked.
Yeah, as soon as we get out of the woods.
Marshall said.
No signal until we're through. It's a dead spot.
Dead spot. Steve felt a shiver run up his spine.
What did the guy look like?
He asked. Marshall shook his head.
It happened so fast. He was maybe 6'2" or 3. Pale. Dark hair. Around 40. He was grinning.
That's fucked up.
Jay said, looking over his shoulder again, but Steve felt a thread of new unease. Except for the grin, Marshall had just described himself. Marshall stopped walking suddenly, his eyes wide.
Did you hear that?
He pointed behind them, gesturing vaguely north. Steve and Jay both froze. Steve strained to hear whatever Marshall had heard. Nothing.
What was it?
Jay whispered.
Something moving in the bushes.
Marshall said. He looked even paler.
You didn't hear it?
They waited for a few tense seconds, but the sound didn't repeat.
If there was a sound at all.
Steve had been listening. He hadn't heard anything. Why would Marshall lie?
Well, I'm about to shit my pants.
Jay said.
Let's fucking go, okay?
They started walking again, as fast as they could without running. Marshall's limp was getting worse. As much as Steve wanted to take off, they would leave the jogger behind if they started to run.
Maybe that's a good idea.
Why was Marshall still wearing his jacket all zipped up? It had pockets with stuff in them. Steve could see sharp angles outlined through the thin nylon. A phone, some keys maybe, but what else? An MP3? A knife?
Why would you even run out here after what happened?
Jay asked, dodging looks left and right.
You got a death wish or something?
Marshall shook his head.
That's what Gene said. I like the woods. They're cool and quiet. Nobody uses this trail anymore. I can hear myself think out here, you know?
Who's Jean?
Jay asked in a small voice.
My wife.
Marshall said.
You said her name was Gina.
Steve said. And he felt like his head was full of frantic bees, thoughts rushing in every direction at once. He tried to keep his face as blank as Marshall's, but his voice sounded heavy and weird.
Sure,
Marshall said.
Gina. Anyway, I don't fit the profile. All the victims were young men, about your age, actually. Their whole lives ahead of them. Tragic to be cut down so young before they even had a chance to really live. To make mistakes and learn from them. Although I guess you could say they each made one final mistake, right? One last, fatal mistake.
Steve's alarm bells had gone from chiming to clanging. He looked at Jay, who stared back at him with rising panic.
Now's a good time,
Marshall said, and slipped his hand into his pocket. Jay broke first, but barely, both of them running full out before the killer brought out the knife.
Holy shit, oh my fucking god.
Stephen dropped the branch and the gas can and threw himself into the run, pumping his arms like a kid flying.
Hey!
Marshall cried, dismayed and then angry.
Hey, wait!
Steve and Jay pounded dirt, charging through unseen spiderwebs, gasping in dust and the smell of the woods, hearing Marshall's ragged steps falling farther behind. Steve shot a look back and saw him still coming but losing ground fast, the knife in his hand a shining rectangle of...
Rectangle?
They kept running, losing the stumbling Marshall around a bend in the trail. They heard a thump and a cry of pain. Marshall had crashed and burned. They were leaving him behind. Thoughts formed out of the bright, humming panic in Steve's mind.
Now's a good time.
To check for a signal, apparently.
It's a phone!
He gasped.
He was holding a phone.
Don't care.
Jay panted back at him. His face had gone bright red with exertion.
What was that shit about mistakes? Fuck that guy.
Truth. All that really mattered was getting out of the fucking woods and back to the world of people and safety. And Steve thought he could see where the trees opened up not far ahead. They were definitely thinning out, and Steve's boot hit a divot in the ground and caught on something, a rock or a root. He lost his balance and yelped when he went down, crashing to his hands and knees. He tried to take off from the ground, digging his toes in and heaving forward, but his boot hit something else, and he only managed to lay himself out flat on the trail, face in the dirt. Jay pulled up and turned.
Jesus, you dumb fuck! That scared the shit out of me!
Steve crawled to his knees.
Sorry, man. I tripped.
Jay leaned over to give him a hand, and Steve saw a tall, pale man slip out of the deep shadows behind him. A man with dead eyes and a fierce grin, exactly as Marshall had described. The two men could have been brothers. The man reached around Jay with a wicked hunting knife gripped in one gloved hand. He slid the blade across Jay's throat, opening the flesh like butter. Jay's eyes went wide, and when he tried to scream, blood pumped out and splashed over Steve like rain. Jay fell forward, crashing into Steve, knocking him off balance, pinning him. The killer grinned down at Steve, who could feel his friend's body shuddering all over, his hot blood soaking through Steve's sweaty shirt. The killer stepped forward with the knife, and Steve had time to wish that Jay had gone on a fucking diet and that Sarah had put gas in the goddamn tank. He regretted running away from the innocent jogger, whose presence might have made a difference. Anything else he might have thought was cut short.